What's up, Shawn?
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you guys?
Yeah. So this is Shawn Herne. He is, correct me if I get your title wrong, you are the executive director of the Babe Ruth Birthplace Foundation and Museum.
It's the Babe Ruth Birthplace Foundation.
Okay.
And when we had two museums,
right.
We had the Babe Ruth Birthplace Museum and the Sports Legends Museum. So
gotcha.
The foundation is the parent company.
Perfect.
For what we had two products.
Gotcha. And let's get something out of the way right now.
Yeah, because I feel like everybody who's listening is cracking up right now at the way you say
No,
museum.
nobody is, but you will be. So I cannot, I can't believe you never brought this up to me in all of our years working together, which we'll get into that in a bit. I can't say the word museum. I say it with jazz hands, with proverbial. I say museum. I can't. I don't know. I just
Museum.
Shazam. Museum.
We had to get it out of the way, Shawn, because
I have never noticed that.
I know.
We tried to avoid contact with you as much as possible. So
you're going to notice it for the whole
my
time
years
you're
at
here
my
now.
tenure at the Babe Ruth Foundation was quite a blur anyway. So I don't know.
It was a long time ago.
Now it was, yeah.
Yeah. Start adding up, doing the math, and like, wow, because we closed Sports Legends 5 years ago.
Right.
So it's been a long time.
You know, my favorite, I don't know if we should even admit this on camera, my favorite thing about working there has nothing to do with my time there, was the fact that I had like a master key to that place for years. I remember Jay was like, do you still have a key? And I was like, I don't want it anymore. Can I please get ready? He's like, you can destroy it now. I was like, thank you. Yeah.
You just feel like the power.
No, it was a place where, I mean, it housed some pretty amazing things.
Yeah.
Like, I did not want it. You know what I mean? Like between that and the building upstairs. When I say master key, I mean like master key. Like I just didn't want it. You know what I mean? I remember like I kept it like in a little box in a drawer because I was like terrified that like I would lose it or something.
And I monitored those things.
Yeah,
so I would go into the security system to see who had opened because we had electronic keys.
Okay.
Right.
You had to use an electronic key to get now into the vault area, which required a master key. Or a second electronic key.
Right.
It was crazy.
Right.
And so if I saw somebody was in a space they weren't supposed to,
And I do
what
remember.
What were you doing
Yeah,
in there?
what's missing?
To that point, I remember one of my very first interactions with you. It probably wasn't the first time I met you, but I do remember it was one of my very first interactions. We were at Sports Legends. We were down in the vault, which was a complete chaotic mess at that point. Dean may have been there with me. I don't know who was there. I don't know who was supervising at the time. But I do remember I picked up Babe Ruth's glove, somebody's glove. I mean, in this story, I'm going to say it was Babe Ruth's. I remember you walk in and you just said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I responded something very Quincy, like, "Who the hell are you? What's it matter? I'm playing catch," or something to that effect. And you, like, you were just like, I don't know. You like didn't yell, but you were like, "You are the biggest moron I've ever met in my life. Do you know what you're doing? Why are you here? Please go home." I was like, all right, dude. Yeah.
Well, we had been working on that project for a year at Camden Yards. And then just before we opened, we hired a whole bunch of new staff. And you were one of those folks. So we had exhibit installers from New Jersey putting this stuff together and new staff. And you were 21, maybe?
I think I was like 22, maybe. Yeah, I was young though. Yeah.
But butting heads with the exhibit installers.
Sure.
So I remember because we would work all night long, all day long, all night long, and then go over to one of the local pubs just before they closed, before we then would turn around and go back to work.
When I say like we would sleep, I think that's serious. Like it would be 4 a.m. Like, well, there's no point in going home.
Yeah.
Just sleep on the floor and then go back to work.
And this was just while you were curating it?
Building
Okay.
it. Yeah, when we were building it. And that was a long time ago. Now, hell, I'm in bed at 9 o'clock at night. And,
those are fun times.
You know?
Those are really fun times. Formidable years.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it really changed and shaped your personality going forward.
I can confidently say I am still the same exact person. Maybe a bit more, slightly more mature or more responsible.
Yeah, in situations.
But I'm pretty much the same exact person that I was then.
Well, and I'll say this because I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I think you have. I think there's a considerable amount of maturity that has gone on there, and you are probably the most successful person that has come out of that project.
But that's not that. I don't know if that's saying much or.
Well, for those of us, for the rest of us that were involved in that project, But we knew you were talented then. You were just 22 at the same time. So you quickly got bored with whatever you were doing. So you were always looking for another challenge, another thing to do. So we knew you were talented.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that world, right? We can leave that compliment in because I know you want to cut that out. But the funny thing about that world, and I think like, and I do want to I want to move past this in a second. But the most interesting thing about working there is, and I think there's a huge comment. And I imagine it's the same way with a lot of like that industry across the board, right? Is you get hired. I don't remember what I got hired for, but you learn everything and you have to do everything, and it's so sort of like bare bones and grassroots and sort of like, you know, there's no budgets for anything. But I mean that in a good way. I don't mean that in a bad way. You know, like there's budgets where there needs to be budgets for, and then you know the ancillary stuff you just gotta make it up. You know, you don't have the budget to hire a massive tech team, so you just learn how to do it. So like the stuff that you learn there, is certainly the stuff that I learned there, was kind of incredible because if you don't have the money to outsource it, you got to do it yourself. You know, so I mean, it was a very interesting place to work.
Well, and you're absolutely right. I mean, and the museum industry is going through this right now because of COVID. It required a tremendous amount of innovation,
right?
And it wasn't that we didn't necessarily have the money; we didn't want to spend the money on certain things,
right?
And I would much rather spend the money training someone to learn how to do it than to hire a consultant and I get a one shot.
Yeah.
Whereas if I can train someone, spend that money that way. So we were learning a lot of things. And what I tell all museum employees and students that want to become museum employees is that it's really 70-30. You're spending 70% of the time in your job description and 30% of the time doing everything else.
Wow.
Because you have to. And for those people who cannot do that, you're not going to last in the industry.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like we're seeing that right now with teachers.
Yeah.
Teachers do a lot more than we've ever given them credit for. And they're doing it right now. And I know teachers right now who are trying to talk to tech people because they're going back in the classroom and they can't get certain things to work in their classroom. And they're tired of waiting. So they're hiring their own tech people to try to get stuff fixed. Or they're learning how to do it themselves. And I think post-COVID, the museum industry is going to look profoundly different than it did going in. I think the industry was already in a situation where we needed to adapt and we were not adapting. We were becoming dinosaurs. We were facing what public libraries faced about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You go to a public library today, it doesn't look anything like it used to. It's now all computer banks and programming, and nobody shushes you because everybody's talking. It's an active, vibrant place.
Right.
The museum industry is going to have to do the same thing. And I think COVID has only accelerated that.
Yeah, and so to that end, we'll kind of skip forward a little bit. So you guys have an event happening right now.
We do.
Right? And which is arguably one of what I remember, if not the most major, one of two most major. Right? You had the birthday bash and the gala.
Say that again?
Yeah.
Where is it being held, though?
So actually, it's being held online, jackass. Anyway, so right now is going on is the Babe Ruth birthday bash, which you're talking about how the industry has changed so much because of COVID. So in years past, it's been a huge thing, like a literal party in the street. This year, not so much, right?
This year, not so much, but a birthday bash always had a programming component to it. So we would bring celebrities in and we would talk about the upcoming Orioles season or Ravens season or Maryland, things like that. So it would be held at a restaurant or bar. So there would be ballpark food, there would be beer, and then there would be programs. Some people just hung out in the bar and drank, and that was fine. And other people went into the other rooms and listened to people. So we've tried to recreate that virtually, which is difficult to do. And we've seen some benefits and some casualties. The Engineers Club prepared a Babe Ruth cocktail for us.
Nice.
So we still had that little bit, here's the recipe for the Babe Ruth cocktail. Babe Ruth loved to drink rye, so they made a nice rye drink for us.
That's really cool.
So we were able to keep that. But what we've also found is that we have expanded our reach. So I got emails today from people in Florida who were watching. They would not have come to Baltimore for Babe's birthday bash. But people around the country are now being able to participate. We've also seen a much higher quality quality is not the right word, but the level of celebrity that we've gotten for this year's bash has been much higher because they can do it from their home.
Oh, that's interesting.
Brooks Robinson doesn't make many public appearances anymore, and they're mostly during the day.
Right.
But he did a session for us. He wouldn't have come to bash anymore at night.
Right.
Or he was unlikely. Jim Palmer did a program for us. He's in Florida, but he was able to do it virtually. So we're seeing some real benefits.
Right.
That is making us, not just the Babe Ruth Museum, but all museums, stop and think. So COVID has put us in a situation, the museum industry, of sustainability, access, and inequities. And so when we decided to do Birthday Bash virtually, there were a bunch, including myself, that said we have to charge. This is a fundraiser for us. We have to monetize in some way. But once you do that, and if you do that with any virtual programming, then one, people have gotten used to Zoom programs being free.
Sure.
Two, you are eliminating people who may or may not be able to afford to pay. So we decided to go with what I call the TV radio station model. We made all the programs free. In exchange, we got sponsors and advertisers to pay for it. So it's still a fundraiser in that regard, but the programming has been now free to anyone who wants to watch it. And I think moving ahead for all museums, that's going to be something, those are the three things that we're going to be talking about. Sustainability, access, and inequities. How do we make sure that what we are now producing is available to all schools, not just the ones that can afford it?
Right.
Okay. We also have got to be sustainable. You know, we want to be here. So the model is going to have to change. And I think those institutions that have people who are innovative in thinking will do that. Those who do not are going to be gone.
Sure.
The American Alliance of Museums is estimating that 30% of museums will not survive COVID and the economic impact following
That's
COVID.
a huge number.
That's 30%.
Yeah, and there's a lot of museums,
That's a lot of museums. Some have already, and
Sure.
the ones that are most vulnerable are the local community centers. They don't have large amount of financial resources to rely on. They're the newer museums for the same reason, and what tends to be African American and Latino related museums for the same reasons. They don't necessarily they haven't been around for 50, 60, 100 years to build up an endowment or anything like that. So we're going to see some losses that I'm not sure as a society or community we're going to be ready to accept.
Wow.
And what do you think the impact is, like, when a community loses, like Baltimore, for instance? The one thing you can say about Baltimore, and I think I remember some statistic, like at one point, didn't Baltimore have like the most museums?
Pretty close. Pretty
like
close.
That, right?
I mean, Washington and Philadelphia are pretty good rivals.
Gotcha.
But when you start talking about 30%,
right?
Okay, 15, 20, 25 museums in the Baltimore area potentially closing.
Right.
Now, I started hammering that to people in Annapolis and city government, saying, and you know, I took your approach. I just in their face, which ones are you ready to sacrifice?
Right.
Well, of course, you know, politicians, we're not ready to sacrifice any. Well, then what are you going to do?
Right.
And I was really surprised because the legislature and the governor immediately in their packages started to include museums and attractions.
That's awesome, yeah.
And for most of us, it's going to be the reason why we survive. Now, I'm confident Babe Ruth Museum is going to survive. I'm not confident every institution is going to survive. And those that are, as I said, innovative, you know, the industry is going to change because who our audiences are is going to change. And so for us, we tend to focus on a family audience. Okay. We're a small museum that focuses on families. I think we're going to probably see a recovery quicker than, say, the Museum of Industry or the Science Center, which is heavily dependent on school groups. School groups are not coming back for at least 3 years, if ever.
Wow.
Okay. And
now, why do you say if ever?
Some of the counties were already starting to complain that transportation costs to bring one busload of kids to a museum, just the transportation cost was $700 per bus.
Wow.
So, but that's driver, that's bus, that's insurance, that's, you know, mileage. $700 per bus. You take second graders
Right.
on 3 buses, you've just spent $2,100. That doesn't even include the admission to the attraction.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
I don't think that's coming back. And that is troubling for me because most people's first introduction to a museum is the school field trip.
100%. Yeah.
You know, and so we have to adapt. What we're doing, and we were doing this before the pandemic hit, but it's only made it more important, is we're developing a virtual classroom. And the idea of a virtual classroom is that our educators now will be able to interface with a classroom anywhere in the country. It doesn't even have to be within our local geographic area, but anywhere in the country where, as long as they've got a whiteboard or a camera or some sort of Zoom technology, our educators can interact with that classroom. So instead of the kids coming to us, we have to go to them.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that we are having to develop is virtual lessons that students and teachers can access at their own time. So it doesn't necessarily require an educator to be interacting with the student, but if this student is doing a book report or the student is doing, we want to make sure we have those resources now available for a student to access.
I think
it's novel thinking out of necessity.
Right.
That's funny.
Well, it's funny. We interview a lot of business owners and we keep hearing repetitive themes like, unless we do this, we're not going to be around in the next year. Like it's short-term projections out. A year is going to cripple a lot of businesses. With museums specifically and running a sports museum around a legend, right? Like, do you feel like you have a little bit of an advantage over, I don't want to say the wrong term, but more of an educational, like art or the Museum of Industry? You said everybody knows about Babe Ruth. Little kids growing up playing baseball learn about Babe Ruth. So do you feel like you always have a constant audience?
No, I think it's more of a challenge for us because we are finding it more difficult to fit into school curriculums. Okay, which is why we focus more on family programming and family tourism. I tell everyone we're squirrels. We spend the summer gathering nuts, hoping we get through the rest of the year, because that's when families travel. So our virtual classroom, we're not going to be teaching sports. We're going to be using sports to teach. So example, we're working on a math unit, statistics unit, actually. Baltimore County teacher has already developed it, where it's called The Numbers Don't Lie. And you're going to compare different athletes of the same sport. So quarterbacks in football or sluggers in baseball, whatever, and answer the question, who is the better player? And you're going to look at it through statistics.
Wow.
So I have never had a teacher come to me and say, I need a unit on sports. Okay. So, and that's where I say museums have to change and adapt. We have to become a resource for teachers and classrooms and students and not sit there and say, you all need to come see us. And that's why I said, I think in some ways we will probably recover a little quicker. Our advantage is that we are smaller. And as a result, the number of people in our space we can control better.
Sure.
Some of the other places that rely solely on school groups are going to suffer longer. I know the Science Center reported they were at 21% capacity. You know, that hurts. But, you know, we have to adapt.
Yeah.
One of the things that we have done is, you know, we're open to the public Friday, Saturday, and Sunday right now. So the general public. But if you want to come in with your family because you need to get your kids out and do something, but you don't want them around other people, I'll rent you an hour at the museum of any day of your choosing. So it's just you and your family. You know, you feel safe being around your family, but you don't feel safe being around other people. We'll work with that.
Right.
And I think as a smaller institution, we can do that. I'm also thinking that we will see some recovery in our rental business. So most museums are dependent on admissions, store revenue, special events like Birthday Bash, and rentals. Museum of Industry has one of the best premium rental locations.
Their spot is fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
They're going to recover some of that quickly because so many people have postponed their weddings and postponed things that part of their business will probably pick up before school groups do. We're small. and we have an outdoor space, so we're already seeing some rentals for the fall, which is really encouraging for me. And retirement parties, what we have to do is we have to play to our niche, and I think everyone is kind of discovering what their niche is right now. And then there are some who aren't. They're just waiting for this to be over. This doesn't end when people get vaccines.
Sure. That's so true.
The Hotel and Lodging Association is saying that they feel the tourism industry is not going to see full recovery till 2024, and that the hotel industry is not going to see a recovery till 2026. That's absurd to me. I don't think it's going to be quite that bad. But what we're not talking about is how many losses people in the tourism industry are taking right now. A friend of mine runs a restaurant. He told me he's $500,000 behind on rent because of COVID.
Sure.
Yeah. You don't dig out of that hole right away.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be something for all of us in the community, Baltimore, Greater Baltimore area, to start thinking about. And the same group, they did a survey on the plus side of that negative number I just gave you. They're also saying that 60% of people that they've surveyed are planning some sort of trip this year. But they want to stay away from large groups of people.
Right.
So we got to figure out how to present that, how to put that together.
Right.
How do I get someone to visit the Babe Ruth Museum and reassure them that it is safe to do so? And we kind of see that, be it our Railroad Museum has been operating at 7 days a week because there's perception, a lot of it's going to be spent outside.
Right.
The zoo has done okay because you can control your space.
Right.
For those of us in tighter spaces, we've got to make sure that we can reassure people that it's okay to bring your kids down.
Right. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying before. When we lose these institutions in these certain neighborhoods, I feel like tourism kind of generally starts with like, I want to go see this, or I want to go see that. I'm going to go to this city to see this certain attraction. And when those things are gone, when they start to fall off one by one, it's more than just that one institution that suffers. It starts to branch out into the immediate community. And of course, there's the loss of jobs. There's also the loss of revenue in tourism throughout the city as a whole. You lose that one more reason for somebody to come to, especially in a city like Baltimore. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Where tourism pre-COVID, I mean, do you think it was on the up? Do you think it was on the down? Where do you think it was going?
I don't think it wasn't going up.
Right.
So Baltimore's got a change going on right now in that all the attention now is on Harbor East.
Okay.
And the Inner Harbor is not. But our attractions are in the Inner Harbor.
Right.
So, and on top of that, and as to your point, all of these businesses, all these industries feed each other.
Right.
So if people aren't coming to the Babe Ruth Museum, they're also not going to the Penn restaurant around the corner. They're not going to Pickles Pub. They suffer.
Right.
The Holiday Inn across the street from us closed. They just did a renovation 2 years ago. They're just gone.
Right.
They just shut down because they had too much debt. Same thing as with the Inner Harbor. Right now, it's the Science Center and the aquarium, but if people aren't going there, the restaurants are gone. So we need to talk about a longer term recovery of tourism.
Right.
I think in the short term, i.e. the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see people taking shorter, smaller trips, stay at home, longer weekend type of things, or staycations kind of things. We're not going to see people suddenly jumping on cruise ships or heading to Europe. I hope I'm wrong about that.
Right.
But for me, in the winter months, I'm focused on a local family group. In the summer months, I'm looking at families coming from New York City, Boston, Red Sox fans, Yankees fans,
baseball season,
because of baseball season, and whatever is going on at Oriole Park.
Right.
We're not getting that.
Right.
So fans in the stands is incredibly important to me for the reasons I just said before. We're squirrels. If I have to go through another summer with no fans, we'll figure out how we have to make another year. But if we're not bringing in the revenue in the summer, we're certainly not going to be bringing in tourism revenue in December, January, and February.
Right. Jeez.
So it's complicated. I think a lot of people are talking about it. Visit Baltimore has been talking about it for a while in terms of what was Baltimore going to look like before there was a pandemic, but now after. and the good news in some ways, it kind of levels the playing field a little bit, because every community is going to be doing the same thing. In terms of us for conventions, we're not going to see conventions coming back anytime soon.
Right.
And now that everyone has gone to Zoom and all this online stuff, different CEOs can address their employees without bringing everyone together. Well, that hurts the restaurants around the convention center and the hotels around the convention center. So, this recovery is going to be very different. I think parts of the industry are not going to recover at all. But we're also going to see some new things. You guys are in the real estate business. I am absolutely convinced that commercial real estate, which was in retail side of it, was certainly in trouble before. This is the nail in the coffin. And
you wouldn't be the only person saying that.
Well,
office spaces, large office buildings. Nobody. I mean,
just drive up and down York Road. You see all the signs. Shawn, I have a question that is somewhat off topic, and this is just only because I feel like I get I don't know the right word is. I get part frustrated, but also kind of get part heartbroken every time I go down. What is going on with the Inner Harbor? Like, the pavilions are empty.
Pavilions are empty because they're owned by an investor outside of Baltimore, and they're trying to wrestle that away.
Is there a plan? I mean, it's this amazing
there's
piece
folks
of real
working
estate.
on it. My complaint about Baltimore, and I'll expect calls from certain people after I say this,
we can
is
edit
that
this out if we need to.
No. Because I don't apologize. Small business rule number one is you don't make it difficult for someone to give you money.
Right.
Okay. Yet we charge enormous parking fees to park in Baltimore City. It is miserable. Why would I come down to the Inner Harbor right now if I know I'm going to have to spend $20 or $30 to park?
It's as much to park it is to buy a ticket to the aquarium.
Remember, I don't mean to jump in, but getting a COVID test.
Right.
A free COVID test costs you $23 and you're in and out in 12 minutes.
Right.
Like, what? Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
No.
Anecdotally, that's making your case.
But on the other hand, parking for a while was one of the biggest revenue sources for the city.
It still is.
They had to, right?
It still is.
You could argue they kind of had to charge that, right? Yeah.
The museum industry as a whole in the country employs 750,000 people and generates $59 billion in local revenue. Some of $12 billion of that is just tax revenue. So, think about that in all of this shutdown and people losing jobs and such, is that, cities are seeing that hit with restaurant revenue, the hotel taxes that the city charges, all that's gone away. So the city, that's why I'm saying the recovery is not going to be quick.
No.
The recovery is going to take a long time, and we're going to have to rethink how we do things. There are several museums we're trying to partner together, because I may not have convinced you to bring your family down to see the Babe Ruth Museum, but if I throw in the B&O Railroad Museum with it, and say, okay, we're going to do a combo ticket at a much reduced price. Here's something to do with the kids for the day.
Yeah, museum and a lunch or takeout.
So we're trying to do those kinds of things to entice people to say, you know what, let's go out. Let's spend a day. We'll walk around. But that was a problem before COVID.
Right.
I mean, our biggest challenge was never getting people to come from New York or Boston. Our problem was getting people to come from Towson and Westminster. Right. What I call the TV circle. It's always doom and gloom. It's always bad. And I don't think that's the truth. I mean, I have neighbors now who are like, I can't believe you work downtown every day. And I'm like, I've worked downtown for 20 years.
Sure.
Yeah. And knock on wood, I've never had anything happen.
I had an appraiser in Federal Hill yesterday walk into the house and say, well, this is a bad neighborhood.
Federal Hill?
Federal Hill.
Yeah, Clarkson Street. I'm like, what are you talking? Like,
thanks for knowing your area.
Like, this will go well.
Right.
We're
doomed.
Right.
So it is going to require a whole bunch of people.
Right.
And I don't just say people in the tourism industry. I think there's a whole bunch of people who need to be part of this conversation, who need to be invested in it. Again, you all are in real estate.
Right.
It's going to affect your market, both residential and commercial.
Sure.
We have got to find ways to make it easy for people to come down, make people feel safe, And I think those are always been Baltimore's biggest problems.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily safety, it's the perception of safety. And when we
I think
see all the stories on the news
right.
every day, it's always doom and gloom.
Right.
We've got to find ways to bring people in and make them feel good.
Right.
And I think the museums are part of that. I mean, none of us are in the business of trying to make people feel bad.
Right.
If we are, we got to rethink some of that. But we got to make it worth your while.
Right.
We got to make you want to say, you know what? We haven't taken the kids down to the aquarium in a long time. Let's do it. Now, what I tell people is it's sort of like holiday shopping. In December, you need to go pick up something. You don't want to necessarily do it on a Saturday.
Right.
Okay. If you're not comfortable yet being out with other people, call the place you want to go and say, what's a good day to go there? Okay. I don't want to be around a lot of people. I'm going to tell you it's going to be, for us right now, it's Friday afternoon.
Interesting.
We're not busy on a Friday afternoon. So if you want to come down, it also gives me an opportunity to say, well, we can also accommodate you.
Sure.
Right, yeah.
And I think people are going to have to make a little bit of an effort for that to work.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting.
So,
I have so many questions. I want to back up a bit. So, tell being in the museum industry, I feel like it's such a niche thing. Like, how'd you get into it? Like what does one study in college to become, the executive director of a museum? Like, start there.
Sure.
Are you hearing museum yet?
A little bit. A little bit.
Mark, how's this feel to be your last day working here?
No.
Look, there's this camera in between us. What do you mean no? I can't see you.
I know.
I don't like it.
So I tell folks that I was Lisa Simpson as a child. My father was an auto worker. My father was an auto worker.
No, I meant on the Lisa Simpson part.
My father was an auto worker.
Okay.
My mother was a stay-at-home mom.
Okay.
We were a blue-collar family, and I was the egghead smart one. And
was Lisa Simpson?
Lisa Simpson's the smart one.
Oh, you know what? I'm thinking of Lisa Simpson as the baby that always ran off, like fell
Maggie?
off of things. Yeah. Sorry.
No,
yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah.
And I grew up on an Indian reservation in northern New York and southern Canada.
Okay.
My father did not take us to like amusement parks or anything like that. We would go to museums in Ottawa, Canada.
Gotcha.
So that's where I first started getting connected with museums. Went to college, became a political science major. Then I became a history major. And well, if you're going to be a history major, there's not a lot of things you can do.
Sure.
The old stereotypes,
Right.
You can fill it in. And there was a advertisement on a bulletin board for the museum studies program at the University of Delaware.
Interesting.
And it took me a few more years to get there, but that's what I did. I just thought that would be cool to do. I get to play with the stuff and talk about history.
Right.
And so that's how I got there. Started, I did some time at the Smithsonian, I worked at the Railroad Museum as a curator there, and then came over to the Babe Ruth Museum when we were building sports legends. But I wasn't a sports guy. My intent to be at Sports Legends was 1 year. I was going to give them 1 year.
Oh, you're not a sports guy? Because you're really big into Formula One, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So,
sorry, Shawn, did you come down here from college to do the B&O? Is that how you got to Baltimore?
No. I went to the University of Delaware to do my graduate work.
Right.
And at those days, to be certified in the museum field, you have to do field work, essentially the equivalent of student teaching.
Sure.
And so I interned at the B&O Railroad Museum. And when I came to Delaware, I thought this was the hottest place on earth to begin with. I was driving a pickup truck with no air conditioning, and it's like, it's so hot down here. So my thought was, I'll get my degree, go back up north to a colder climate, and enjoy skiing and all the things that I'd like to do in the winter. I did the internship. A year later, I graduated. And when I graduated, I got a call from the B&O saying, we've been holding a job for you if you want it. So again, I thought, well, I'll do it for a little bit and head north.
Yeah.
That was 1996. And
so there's still time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So B&O to Sports Legends?
To Babe Ruth Sports Legends, yeah.
I did not realize you were with the Babe Ruth Foundation at that point. I, for some reason, was under the assumption that you had been there for quite a long time.
No.
That's interesting. I
came in a year before you did.
I did not know that. Like, I just assumed, like, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's when I said they hired me because I wasn't a sports guy.
Yeah.
Because I was going to be handling the stuff.
Right.
And they didn't want someone looking and saying, "Oh, this is Johnny Unitas's helmet.
I'm going to
Right.
play catch
You know, I'm going to
with
play
Babe
catch."
Ruth's
Right.
ball glove.
Talk about not into sports. I didn't know anything.
So they
Yeah.
wanted someone who was going to be able to get the stuff in, process it, and not sit there and go, "Wow, this is Babe Ruth's bat."
Yeah.
And so that was the function. So my interest and passion for sports has been acquired over the
Interesting.
years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how you got there. So I know you were a curator for Babe Ruth, and now the executive director. I have another interesting question. Is it just Babe Ruth, or is it all museums that seem to develop a very interesting pool of employees? Why is it's always it's always like, I don't know how you describe it. It's either the most interesting people or the most oddly assembled people that work at museums.
It's all museums,
Okay.
and I call it the island of misfit toys.
There you go. It's if you've never experienced the world, it is fascinating.
Well,
I'm excited to hear about
so
why.
well, the nonprofit business, the nonprofit industry in general,
Okay.
tends to attract people who are very passionate about causes. So they don't put the same value in terms of getting a high-paying job and driving an expensive car. They don't see as much value in that. So the values that they bring to the table are different. So what they tend to bring then is very passion about
Right.
whatever the cause is. And that's what I was saying before, that we would rather spend our money on new exhibits and new educational programs than upgrading our computer systems.
Right.
The value for us is higher on the content side. And as a result, yes, some very unusual folks
I mean, but,
sometimes, but there's two sides of the museum
Right.
industry too, and what I call producers and consumers. So
Right.
you have the people who do the marketing, the people who do the fundraising.
right.
Those I call producers because they're generating the revenue. And then you have the curators, the educators, the docents, the visitor services people who are the ones spending those resources.
Right.
That's a real challenge right now in this, because unfortunately in our industry, those folks, the educators, the curators, the visitor services people are the people who've been furloughed. Those are the people who've been let go.
Yeah.
And the people who are generating revenue or trying to generate revenue are the
Right.
people we've held on to.
Sure. Yeah.
That's always been a conflict.
Right.
Some institutions handle it better than others. But right now, the museum industry educators are taking the biggest hit, absolutely taking the biggest hit, and hourly employees are taking the biggest hit. So some have been furloughed, some have been let go outright. So there's, again, inequities in terms of how this pain is being distributed, even within the industry.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, like you said, if your job right now is to make sure that you're still around when life goes back to relative normal. So making those tough decisions as to who you can still keep on the payroll with, I guess, the knowledge that once we can afford to, we're going to bring most, if not everybody back, right? That's got to be just really tough to decide.
And some of us have done different things. So some institutions have done furloughs, some institutions have done pay cuts, or a combination of those. Some institutions have moved people around. So again, to be in a rare museum, they kept everybody. But what they're working on is probably that 70-30 that I talked about is probably the other way around right now. They're working on a whole bunch of things. They've been doing like painting projects, they've been doing restoration projects, and keeping people working. We're kind of doing that same thing. We're all wearing different hats so that I can keep people employed. We did pay cuts the way I did pay cuts because I'm one of those people. I'm the Lisa Simpson. The senior staff took the biggest cuts percentage-wise, and the junior staff I cut as least as I possibly could. We can. We could, most of the situation, we could absorb the hit a little bit better.
Right.
Hopefully it's not, years. I really do hope we can restore some of this soon. But again, if you've got someone who's innovative, Museum of Industry has taken their educators and their docents and they've put them on, let's develop new stuff while we've got this period of time.
Right.
Okay. So it's making lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah.
If you've got the resources to do it.
Yeah.
And because of things like the PPP program, EIDL and other programs, we've been able to patch things along. but we're still all worried about the long term.
Yeah.
If you remember a year ago, we were talking about flattening the curve in 2 weeks.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
It feels like such a
I know.
long time ago.
it does.
All right.
It does. And now, you know, are we talking 2021, 22, 23
Sure, yeah.
before we get
Right.
back to a point where we're having parties again, and you know,
Or even just feel okay to. You know?
Well,
Yeah.
that's what you mentioned it before with the city. It's perception,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're starting to get the vaccines are starting to roll out. People are getting vaccinated. When are people going to feel like they're safe? It doesn't matter how many shots are in the arms. It's do I
Right.
feel safe in my particular little bubble? Yes or no?
Absolutely. And I think the venue is going to have a big impact on that. So we're fortunate that Oriole Park and Raven Stadium are outdoor
Right.
stadiums.
Yeah.
Places that are arena covered with a roof. I think you're going to see those types of places take longer. I think the outdoor festivals are going to recover quicker. I think concert venues that are outdoors are going to recover quicker because there is a perception that air is moving around, I'm safer.
Yeah.
So we've got to figure out ways to make that work for people. And I think we're going to see that. And I hope we see that and we take advantages of those things that are working in our favor. But I think a lot of people are going to take a wait and see attitude. So who's going to be the first ones to give it a try kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know, none of us know. None of us know. None of us, you know, have been through a pandemic before, and I've been through my share of museum disasters, and you know, pandemic is listed on those things. None of us ever thought we'd have a pandemic.
Right.
You know, here we are now. You know, 20 years from now, we're going to tell kids about, oh, I went through the pandemic. You know, but
Whatever, Dad.
right, exactly.
So you now have been through 2 museum either renovations or complete build outs, right? That's interesting.
Well, there's always some level of something. So
Well, you know
I was
what I
at,
mean,
but
right?
I was
Yeah.
at the B&O Railroad Museum after the roof fell in.
Okay.
So I was there for
Oh,
that.
really? Okay.
So I was there for that. Came over, built Sports Legends. Left.
Can we talk about that for a second? Because Sports Legend doesn't exist anymore,
That's-
right? Which I don't want to talk
Well,
about
yes and no.
that.
As a bricks and mortar structure,
Okay.
it does not exist
Gotcha.
anymore. But because the Babe Ruth Birthplace Museum's mission is Babe Ruth,
Right.
well, we're also the official Orioles Museum. We are also the official archive of the Baltimore Colts. So we still do our programming under the Sports Legends
Gotcha.
banner.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay, so Sports Legends as a bricks and mortar structure
Mhm.
is not there, but our mission to explore other things, Baltimore Elite Giants during Black History
Right.
Month, our Olympians, things like that, falls under the Sports Legends banner. So it's splitting hairs a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
But
yeah.
I don't want people to think we just went back and did Babe Ruth.
Right,
Because
okay.
we did not do that. We have exhibits at Oriole Park. We have exhibits in different places around the city. We are looking for newer venues to put new exhibits in that
Nice.
cover some of those. But, you know, we're exploring all those. My fantasy, and I've been championing this idea for a long, long time, is the idea of a pop-up museum.
Okay.
And now that commercial real estate is going to be changing
Sure.
drastically, I think it's a great opportunity. They're doing these in Asia, and it's different museums that literally pop up in a location for like 3 months.
Right.
And they have brought world-class art and objects
Sure.
to this location for a few months, and then they pack up and they move to the next one. It's kind of like the museum meets the circus.
It's like a
Right.
new traveling exhibit idea. Yeah.
Huh.
And
Interesting,
I
yeah.
would love to create a pop-up museum so that Sports Legends could be in Ocean City for 3 months,
Mhm.
and then it could be in Gaithersburg, or it could be in Cumberland, and then we truly become a statewide institution.
Are there unique like logistical challenges to that? I mean, because you know the stuff you're displaying can't exactly be touched and handled. You know, like
Yeah, so it'd have to be designed so that the whole exhibit and casework was kind of done like in a pod that could be
Gotcha.
packed up, put on a truck, moved to the next one.
okay.
But the way
I
the
see,
circus
yeah.
is.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, when the circus used to come to
Yeah.
Baltimore Arena, well, that's not the same everything as the arena
Right.
in the next city they went to. You have to adapt. You have
Gotcha.
to change, but the content and the idea of the programming stays the same. I would love to explore that. I
Right.
would love, and as I said, as commercial real estate changes, you know, I drive by a building that looked like it was the old Rite Aid, and Rite Aid got taken over. So a bunch of those are now vacant. And I'm like, what could I do with that space? That would be kind of a cool local museum space. It's got a parking lot. It's got doors. Just need to make sure I've got power and security, and I'm good to go.
People are driving by anyway.
Yeah. So, I think, again, when we start talking about innovation, we've got to find ways to get what museums do out to the public and make it easier for the public to access it.
Right.
So it comes back to, again, access and sustainability.
Sure.
So
speaking of innovative, I want to say, like, Sports Legends, when that place was built, I mean, that was a pretty impressive building.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was like 22,000 square feet.
22,000. Wow, you remember that? It was 22,000.
I do remember that. Well, I remember that from when I used to like sell the rentals. I would walk around. I'd always quote that, and then I would just make up stuff about the exhibits, like, "Oh, this is so and so." I didn't know anything. I would just make stuff up. I'm not into sports, and
I did too.
Yeah. I would tell people like, they'd be like, "Oh, is that something about a Babe Ruth baseball?" I was like, "Yeah, it's worth like $100 million." Really? Yeah, sure, whatever. Yeah, I just whatever sold it. Yeah.
Here's our contract.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, but in all honesty, like, I mean, that building was impressive. I mean, just the space.
Yeah, when it opened, USA Today called it one of the top 5 must-see museums in the country. But it also opened at a time when technology was different.
Right.
And so when we built Sports Legends, we built it for different ways people learn. Because we wanted families to come in as a group. So I always tell people, older generations, they're the ones that read the labels. They're also the ones that still get the newspaper every day.
Right.
My generation was the History Channel. I'm much more AV oriented. And kids were tactile.
Right.
Well, we've now added a new whole element of social media and interactive technologies on your hand that by today's standards, Sports Legends would be obsolete. Okay.
I think that's,
okay. So we now have a different expectation of information on demand. But when we did that originally, it was so that, grandma could be going through with child and grandchild, and they could be saying, well, Brooks Robinson was the best third baseman. And someone could say, well, no, Cal Ripken was pretty good at third. And then the kid could be saying whoever the Orioles have currently at third base. But we wanted to spark opportunities for people to have those conversations. The technology now that museums are challenged with is that it's here. They want to do this. And I don't know if we've completely figured that out yet. So QR codes and all that crazy.
Yeah, VR is going to be a component eventually.
Yep. Already is.
Yeah.
Already is. Some of the places that are experimenting with it, it's phenomenal.
You guys had VR at Sports Legends. We had that little soccer kicking game that went down every single day.
We did.
Yeah.
And again, but by today's standards, that looks pretty, ho hum.
Yeah. Costs $700 every 2 weeks to change a light bulb.
The new center at Yorktown in Virginia, you sit in a theater and you think you're in the battle.
Wow.
Because as it's surround, and as the shots are being fired, like the wind is blowing in your face as the cannonball's going over your head, you feel like you're in it.
We need to get an Oculus for the office.
It's a whole different experience.
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
So, and that's what it comes back down to for all of us, is what experience are we trying to create for anyone?
So talking about this, obviously, the generation of just people now versus kind of what you were saying before, how do you think your general audience, like, do you think that there's a challenge there? Like, like I'll take myself, for example, 38 years old. I'm not really into sports in general, but, my sports knowledge, the people that, I don't really know who they are. I didn't grow up with them. Do you think there's a challenge? How do you bridge that gap between like what I think I'm comfortable saying is your current niche audience? How do you bridge the gap to the people that are in their 20s right now? Like how are you going to incorporate these younger people into, the Babe Ruth Museum now?
So that's always been the challenge for every museum, by the way.
Yeah.
And we really can say 20-year-olds, generalizations and stereotypes, but 20-year-olds generally aren't coming to the museum.
Okay.
They're at a stage in their life where that's not a priority.
Are you actively trying to get them to the museum, or have you just said
and
that's not our demographic?
We find different ways. And so, excuse me. And one thing, we don't have an audience. We have audiences. People come to the museum for all different reasons. And so trying to figure out what those reasons are and to make sure that they have that experience, that's what they're paying for.
Right.
So you have 2 young children, okay? So you might not, when you were in your 20s, think, ooh, I got a Saturday, I'm going to go see a museum.
Right.
That's not what you're thinking most of the time when you're in your 20s. Kids change that.
Right.
Okay. And then as they become teens and they have different work assignments, or they're in different clubs, they're in different groups, you're exposed to stuff that you probably would not have been exposed to if they didn't have that. That continues on no matter what. As people start to get older, then they're empty nesters. They're kind of out experiencing things that they couldn't do before that they wanted to do. And then seniors. So our busiest time for seniors is in the off season, because that's when seniors travel as groups. Not this year, but that's, so you have to understand all of those little nuances of your different audiences and play to it. You know that you're not going to get any school programs between the 3rd week of December and the 3rd week of January. Okay, those are the holiday breaks, number 1. And number 2, most people aren't pulling kids out of school 1 week back in. I used to be told that if I wanted to go on a cruise, the 2nd week of September and the 2nd week of January were the perfect times to go, because nobody's pulling their kids out of school during that time.
Makes sense. They just had a break.
Right.
Yeah.
So, makes sense. It's understanding all of those things. You guys are in real estate. You know how your market fluctuates. You know more houses. People are going to be looking for more houses as the weather warms up, because if they're going to be changing school districts, they don't want to pull the kids out midway through the year, or they don't want to pull them out in May, but they want them in the new school, i.e. the new house by September. It's the same thing. It's understanding your audiences and what they're looking for. Right. So as I said, older audiences stereotypically don't do a lot of summer travel unless they're recent retirees and they're on their dream trip. Right. But if they're in a retirement community or a planned community, they're doing stuff late fall. Right. And you just got to be ready for that.
You had mentioned earlier Philadelphia and DC, sort of like the other hubs around Baltimore with large museum presence. I don't think competition's the right word, but how do you go after somebody saying, okay, I'm going to go to Baltimore to see their museums, or I could travel 35 minutes south and go to Washington, D.C. and see literally everything. Like, how do you go after that person?
You have to convince them to do both. It's not one or the other. It's probably both. The DC museums have complained for years about the Smithsonian's, because the Smithsonian's are free. Right. So the museums that charge admission in DC have always complained that, they're competing against that. And Philadelphia has some of that with the Park Service, although Park Service museums do charge admissions now. You've got to work to your strengths. Okay. So if you're talking about the Declaration of Independence, Baltimore is not the city to come to. Right. Okay. But if you're looking in terms of technology, and all technology, we've got a whole bunch of different things between Martin's museum out in Middle River, with airplanes and jets and rocket technology, and B&O Railroad Museum of Industry. If you're looking for something like that, then we're the place to go. Philadelphia doesn't have that, other than the Franklin Institute. So if I tell you, I've got a car to sell you and it's a great minivan, and you're like, I'm in the market for a BMW. I'm like, but I have this great minivan. You're not going to say, okay, I want a minivan. Right. No, you know what you want. What we got to do is make you aware of what we have. Yeah. And that comes down to everything. 1,000 years ago, my first job was a McDonald's manager. And at the time, McDonald's ran under a philosophy called QSCV. Quality, service, cleanliness, and value. That, for them, was their formula for success. I have told every museum person it should be our formula for success, too. Quality means that every exhibit, every program that we do should be the best. Museum quality does still mean something, the phrase, to people. Okay. Ooh, that's a museum quality piece. No, that should mean something. So everything that we should do should have that quality. Service. Service means not when they walk through the door, but that means your website. That means information about parking, information about the surrounding community, how you answer the telephone, how you react on social media. Okay. And that's a new one for us. Cleanliness. Goes without saying. You go to a restaurant and the restrooms are dirty, the first thought is, what does the kitchen look like?
Yeah.
Okay. Same with museums. If we're a dusty old museum and everything looks like it hasn't been updated since 1985, you're not likely to come back. Thus, the next one, you don't feel like you're getting anything for your money.
Right.
Okay. The value. And the value is both in terms of financial, but also value in terms of what it is you want to expose yourself to, or your friends to, or your kids to, or whatever. What was the purpose you came in the first place? So for us, we understand that people come in the summer months because they're making a pilgrimage. They want to see the house that Babe Ruth was born, and they want to take their kids there. Or two, they're killing time before they go to an Orioles game.
Right.
And quite honestly, that is a real thing.
Sure.
You know, you're in town from another city, you're staying in a hotel, and you got tickets for a 7:05 game. Well, what do we do at 6 o'clock?
Yeah.
Well, why don't we go over to the museum, then we can walk over. So we understand that's why sometimes people walk through the door. And then the third one is they want to expose their family or friends or kids to something about us.
Sure.
I've got to make sure that we fulfill all those. So I follow our ratings and I respond on social media. If someone says something bad about us, I will immediately contact that person and say, what could we have done better?
I think that's key. I mean, that's when you are trying to expand in a competitive space, that personal one-on-one, oh, wait, the director of the museum just reached out to me.
Right.
Okay, I'll give it another shot versus like whatever your one review on Reddit.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. Well, and listen, competition is the right word. As much as we're all museums, we are still competing amongst each other. We're also competing against every other entertainment venue. We used to say we're competing against malls, and that's not quite the same anymore. We shop differently. But we've got to give you a reason to spend your money with us and make you feel good about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So when we talked about rentals earlier, our focus now on rentals, since pregame parties aren't happening at the moment, we're booking retirement parties. Okay. We're not a wedding venue.
Right.
I used to joke because we're a small place. People will ask, they're like, can you handle weddings? And I'm like, maybe your second or your third one, but definitely not your first. We can handle 40, 50 people.
Right.
We can't handle 100 or 200.
Sure, yeah.
But we can handle your rehearsal dinner, or we can handle your bachelor party, and we'll sell you the tickets at Oriole Park. We'll do a whole package,
Right.
but we'll do retirement parties. We've done memorial services.
Right.
Memorial service at a museum? Well,
Yeah.
if the person was a big sports fan,
Right.
my only rule is no bodies. We can do memorial services,
Right.
Yeah.
no caskets.
Gotcha,
But,
yeah.
if you have an urn, that's fine.
Right.
Photograph, fine. We'll
Right.
do all that. But it's understanding who you can appeal to.
Right.
I'm not going after the wedding market
Right.
because I can't offer them anything.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. But I can refer them to other institutions, and I hope that they're going to refer
Yeah, it's
back
reciprocal.
from
Right,
me.
Yeah.
So for my time there, I just remember obviously there's a ton of cool stuff on display, right? But I always remember the coolest stuff was in the vault. And obviously it rotated, for one reason or another, but the real cool stuff was back there. So what's the coolest thing you guys have in the collection right now?
Wow.
Or some cool stuff.
Well, I mean, my favorite things we've managed this year to put
Right.
out on display for the reasons I've said before. Is we're trying to attract local people to
Right.
come. We're the only place in the world that owns a World Series trophy and a Super Bowl trophy. Those were in the vault. We need to get these out on display.
Right.
And we have Brian Billick's play cards from the Super Bowl, and
Oh,
we also
interesting,
have
yeah.
John Harbaugh's. We need to get these out on
Right.
display. So a lot of that stuff has gone out right now, and I encourage people who want to see them come on down. But yeah, the challenge with the vault is that you've got a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't necessarily fit. My favorite piece, and this was from my first day there,
Right.
was the samurai helmet. So
But that was on display for a bit, wasn't
I
it?
built an exhibit. I vowed I was going to create an exhibit
I can't
to somehow get this samurai helmet out on display because we had a samurai
I
helmet.
can't remember what it was for though.
Yeah, why?
We didn't know. So I did an art exhibit.
All right.
And this was an old trick in the museum industry. When you have no money to do a new exhibit, you do what's called a treasures exhibit. So we called treasures from the attic. It's all the most unusual stuff we had.
Right.
And we put it out on display. Like Cal Ripken's crutches when, you know, crazy things like that. But I saw the samurai helmet and nobody could tell me what it was or why we had it. And at one point, the Orioles had signed a Japanese player and the media was doing a tour. And the Japanese media saw this helmet and dropped to the floor and started bowing to it. And I thought, okay, I really need to find out what this thing is.
Right.
And it was a misunderstanding, turns out. The colors of the helmet were the emperor's colors. So they assumed it had something to do with the
black
emperor.
And red?
Orange. Yeah, orange and green.
All
Orange and green. But,
not even close.
But what we eventually found out was the Orioles in 1984, they had won the World Series in 83. They went to Japan to play the top Japanese teams. And this was the trophy. It was called the Yomiuri Shinbun Trophy. And nobody had any recollection of it. And we couldn't find anything at it. And the Orioles at their holiday party, their Christmas party, somebody said, by the way, has the museum ever figured out what that samurai helmet was? And the spouse of one of the former players said, oh, you mean like the ones we got? And everybody went, huh?
Excuse me.
And that's when we found out. So as soon as then we were able to Google it and we saw pictures.
Interesting.
And we were given a poster in Japanese featuring the Orioles. The whole team went. Cal Ripken, Eddie Murray, all of them, they went for a series.
Right.
And the Orioles beat the best Japanese teams. And so this was the trophy.
That's amazing. That's really cool.
Oh, that is cool.
But when I first got there, I'm like, what is this thing and why do we have it?
Right.
So that's my favorite piece. My second favorite piece that we have, which does relate directly to our mission, is we have a baseball bat that was given to Babe Ruth by Shoeless Joe Jackson. And anyone that are familiar with baseball history knows that, you know, Shoeless Joe is blamed for almost destroying baseball with a Black Sox scandal.
Right.
The year that the White Sox threw the World Series. And he was banned for life. So here you have an object that is attributed to the man who's blamed for almost destroying baseball and the man who is credited for saving baseball on one object. And it's huge. It looks like a piano leg. It's just massive. We have that out on display as well.
How are most of the like the exhibit items, how do you obtain most of them?
So there's a variety of ways. We maintain the Orioles collection for them, and we maintain some of the Ravens collection for them. So in non-COVID years, we would literally sit down with them at the beginning of each of their seasons and say, okay, are there any particular milestones for the team, the club this year? Mm-hmm. And if there are, we should try to save some of those. Or do you have any standout players? Because 15, 20 years from now, you're going to want some of this stuff.
Gotcha.
Okay? So we do plan in that regard. The rest of the stuff we've either acquired ourselves, which is part of our collection, or we borrow from folks. And we have stuff that people lend to us that they don't want their name. They don't want to be thanked. They want to be thanked privately. They don't want to be thanked publicly. And we get a lot of that. Babe's Birthday Bash, the presenting sponsor did it anonymously.
I saw that on the site.
So we have to say presented by an anonymous donor.
I saw that,
You know, because they wanted to support it, but they don't want their name on it because once you put your name on it, you're now you have a bullseye for everybody else who's looking for money.
I was going to ask what were some of the reasons why, but other than just personal, I don't need to be thanked, but
some folks just do. There are still people who do philanthropy, one, out of the kindness of their hearts, and two, because they think it's their responsibility.
Sure.
So I have a couple on my board. And I don't think they're uncomfortable about me talking about this. But when COVID hit and we closed the museum down on a Sunday, I called an emergency meeting of the executive committee. And one of my board members called me 10 minutes before the meeting and she said, I know what we're going to talk about. So let me ask you this, what's your payroll? And at that time I said, my payroll is about $25,000, $26,000 a month. And she's like, okay, we're going to write you a check for $25,000. Don't lay anybody off until we figure this out.
Wow.
And they've done this in a bunch of locations that they're affiliated with because they feel that's their responsibility. Right. They've been successful. Awesome. And it did. That got us to the PPP program, which then we have now been able to put keep putting back together. there are still people who do that. There are still people who believe in the community enough, or they're passionate about the subject matter, where they're saying, you know what, I'm going to write you a check. And the generosity of folks, I've been amazed. I had a volunteer email me and said, I'm going to leave a check for you at the museum. My husband wants to make a donation. And I'm, okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. When I'm down next, I'll pick it up. I opened it up as a check for $3,000. That was not their normal gift.
Right.
I think in the current situation, people are being more generous. I think people need to be more generous. I'm trying to be more generous. I support animal charities. I'm writing more checks to animal charities than I normally would. But that's the only way any of us are going to survive this.
You really are. I'm glad you brought that up, because you really are seeing the best come out of people when you need it the most. And again, it's one of the things that we always tend to hit on in each episode that we've done, is how people are coming together, not only to help a business, but you're also helping support one of the defining characteristics of Baltimore, which is its resiliency. It's blue collar. It's like, put your boots on and keep going back to work. Like, that's what the city is for. And without generosity, like people and if you talk to them and you find out that they don't want that mentioned at all, we'll absolutely cut that whole part out. But
I didn't mention their names.
You didn't say anything. So, I think that was incriminating.
That's fine. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, again, the news cycle tends to focus on the crazy person who in the grocery store refused to wear a mask and is, screaming and ranting, not the person who is picking up the groceries for his elderly neighbor because they don't want to go out in the store.
Right.
So we aren't focusing enough on the kindness and generosity and the better nature of people and some of the amazing things that have happened in this. My thing right now is teachers. You know what? For all of you who have kids at home all day long, you know the challenge of what that is like. And teachers are dealing with it, and now dealing with it where they're having to teach virtually and in person at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that is crazy. None of us knew what Zoom was. Well, you guys might have, but most of us didn't know what Zoom was a year ago.
Right.
Now, everything is that, and our classrooms are all about that. There's been some amazing things. And of course, the doctors and nurses and just amazing people who have gone out of their way to try to help others during this time. Yeah. And there's not enough credit given to those.
Yeah. So I want to give you a few minutes to talk about the birthday bash, because we kind of we mentioned it for like a second.
Well, how might I touch on this? So our revenue during this pandemic has dropped 80% because museums are dependent on admissions, store sales, special events, and rentals. Well, we can't do any rentals because we're limited to 25% capacity, and nobody really would show up anyway, I think. Admissions and store sales go hand in hand.
Right.
And, we're open right now, but we're getting 5, 6, 10, 12 people a day.
Right.
Okay. Compared to in the baseball season, anywhere from 300 to 500 a day.
Wow.
Okay. So there's those numbers. And then special events. So birthday bash. For us, it's birthday bash. It's our opening day party and our gala. Galas are not coming back anytime soon. I just don't see that. They were kind of on the decline anyway. Everybody's kind of gala'd out.
Right.
So I don't see those coming back. We don't know what opening day is going to look like, and we're probably not going to get tickets. So our opening day is probably not going to happen this year again. And so then there's birthday bash. And so we had to change the formula or just lose the whole thing.
Right. And in years past, birthday bash was tied to opening day, right?
No. Babe's birthday bash is always February, and then opening day is probably the last week of March into the first week of April.
Okay.
And but that's our life. That's our lifeblood.
Right. Yeah.
So we're doing birthday bash now. I think birthday bash and what we have done, and we've partnered with several companies to try to give it more polish and make it easier for people to give us money.
Right.
So we're using a platform called GiveSmart, where the programs are embedded into that platform. You can bid on auction items at the exact same time. You can make a donation. You can buy tickets. We're trying to make it easy for people to click once to give us money. I think this virtual programming is now here to stay. I don't think it goes away when COVID ends. I think this is our future. We will still do in-person programming, but we're also going to be able to do some virtual programming. So I started saying we were building a virtual classroom.
Right.
We're now building a virtual classroom and studio. Right. So that if I get the manager of the Texas Rangers coming in, I'm going to sit them down on a stool. We're going to do an interview like we're doing here, and then put it out to everybody. Because that means I can reach now Texas Rangers fans that I couldn't reach before.
Sure. And I know you guys, for the past few months have been doing these like sort of like one-on-one or Q&A things, and they've been pretty well received, So like you say it's virtual is here to stay. Do you think it really truly will change the path of how you market? Because I think one interesting thing about the Bash, full disclosure, being on the board and being able to sit in on planning sessions, and knowing how truly different it is from how you guys have done things in the past, is in my mind, as I'm hearing the planning, I'm like, this should be, and I think I expressed this to you, this should be the base of how things are done in the future. Like, this is almost like the first attempt at what should basically be done on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, right? Do you really think it'll change the trajectory of how you guys market from now on?
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're working with a class out of Towson University. A professor there is a dear friend of mine, old friend of yours, Dorothy Fuchs Yeager.
Oh, yeah.
Is teaching at Towson. And so she's teaching a class, and I've given them the assignment of building new virtual audiences, and finding ways for us to measure, quantify the success of our virtual programming.
Okay.
Because in the old way, I could say 25,000 people came through the door of the museum last year. Okay. I can't say that. And even with Birthday Bash, a lot of people that were on last night for the first night of programming were also with other members of their family.
Right.
So I can't say we had 200 viewers, because we might have had 400 viewers.
We
might have had 600 viewers. We're not quite sure how to figure
that. There's a formula
that.
for like one viewer is supposed to count as like, you're supposed to count one viewer as like 3 bodies per se, something like that. You see a lot of like churches now using this formula because all that stuff has, but that's an interesting, and we talk about this all the time. Like, we do obviously a ton of video stuff, but like the hardest thing in that switch to marketing is like, how do you measure success with stuff like that, right? Do you measure it in view count? Do you measure it in revenue from it, which typically isn't as much as what you would see as an in-person event? Like, do you measure it in likes? Do you measure it in back-end reach, which nobody even knows what the hell that means right now, It's very hard to measure what the success is. And I think the hardest part for anybody who's trying to do things, but especially for an organization like the Babe Ruth Foundation, who's, I guess relatively just getting started with it, is it takes a while, right? It's a thing where it's like, you really got to be at it for 2, maybe 3 years before you truly see, that success from it.
Yeah, for me, it's so easy to see that this is the way to go.
Yeah.
And I said, we try to figure out how is the best way to quantify and to monetize it. So we went with the TV and radio method. If you're buying advertising time on WBAL at dinner time, you're going to pay a whole different rate than if you're paying for it at 11 p.m. or 2 a.m.
Right.
Okay. Because again, it's the viewership. So we've got to try to figure out how to make those things work. So I can put your logo on our virtual programs using this new platform. We haven't been able to do that before.
Right.
So I think we're going to start to see more polish. So we've hired a company. We do 2 types of virtual programs right now, soon to be 3. The 2 that we do are what I call like the curator's corners. So we'll take an object like the samurai helmet and do a 2 to 3 minute program about that and tell you about it. And that's it. Okay. From the vault, from the archives kind of thing. Okay. Or we'll do a live session where we're sitting down with someone and we'll spend 40 minutes having a moderator talk to them, ask them questions, and then we open it up for Q&A, like the old Oprah Winfrey kind of show.
Right.
And then the next one is going to be the school stuff that I talked about before. We're going to continue those.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to do 2 of the smaller programs a month, and I want to do at least 1 of the live programs each month. Now, we've already done a bunch of those, and we have hit on topics that we've never been able to hit on before. And I think that is where we fulfill our mission. We provide value and quality back to the community.
Right.
And if the community then sees us as a valuable thing, it builds.
100%. I mean, that's so spot on.
So we got to use the stuff. I still want people to come through the door,
right?
But I want people to come. I want people to see our programs and go, you know what, we've got to get down there,
right?
That's
or like, hey, they mentioned this one thing in this thing. I really want to go see it. 100%, yeah. Do you have a online store still?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, we do. And what we've tried to do with the online store as well as our regular store is now get merchandise that you can't find on Amazon. So I'm not going to sell a lot of stuff that I know you can go with one click and go get cheaper. Okay. And that has been beneficial. So in our industry, we talk about what our per cap number is. And the per cap number is admissions revenue and store revenue. So I might say that my admissions revenue is $12 to get in. My per cap might be 10. And what I mean by that is, well, kids are a lot cheaper, so there's a balance there, but how much money are you going to spend in the store? So what I try to do is lure you in. So I give away a lot of buy one, get one free admissions passes or discounts, just about anything like that. Because if I get you through the door and you buy something in the store, I've won. It's the old seats on an airplane.
That's why the stores are always at the very beginning.
When the plane leaves, that seat's empty. You got $0 at full amount. But if you sell that seat at a discount, you got some money. So we try to do that. We try to incentivize folks, and I hope that you feel like you've got a value. You're going to most likely then spend more money in the store.
Totally. Are you guys still selling the Memorial Stadium chairs? Because whenever I ever mention to somebody that I used to work there, the first question they ask is, "Can you get me a Memorial Stadium seat?" And it's like, no. Like
we just had one.
What are you gonna do with it?
I don't know. People love these things. They're like, people clamor over these things.
I've got my friend Paul saw an Oriole Park seat that we have in this auction right now for Birthday Bash. Cal Ripken just signed it, and he's like, "Where can I put that? Where can I?" And I'm like, "Why would you want a Camden? You have a townhouse. You don't have a lot of space. You don't have a club basement, bar in your house. If you did, that's perfect." But yeah, and we had a Memorial Stadium chair that we pulled out. We're going to auction it later because we're still trying to get someone from that era to sign it. So
I'm gonna tell my buddy, because he literally just a couple weeks ago he asked me about one.
And that's one of the things I'm trying to do, because we're talking about new things to try. Is I think we're going to have an auction once a month.
Sure.
We're going to have a single item. Now, I always have to be clear that these are items that have been donated to us for the intent to sell.
I was going to ask, how's that work?
We're not selling stuff out of the collection ever.
Are you ever allowed to do that?
No.
Okay.
In the industry, when you accept something into the collection, it's supposed to stay there. The only times that you are allowed to what's called de-accession it is when it's redundant. You have multiple copies of it, but you're supposed to then find another museum for it to go to.
Interesting. Okay.
So it's not let's just put it up in the store. Now, there's some things, baseball cards. We don't collect baseball cards. So we sell baseball cards in the store. Okay. Some prints. So everything in our silent auction right now was donated to us or acquired for the intent of being part of a silent auction.
It's interesting. There's almost like a code of ethics for the stuff you intake.
Not even. There is absolutely a code of ethics about it.
Yeah.
And one of the local art museums, got in trouble about 2 months ago because they had announced they were going to sell pieces of their art collection in order to enhance another thing. And the uproar about it, they withdrew it. They stopped doing it.
There's no mechanism to be like, you know what? Hard times. I'm going to get through this by selling off this $1 million baseball. No. I mean, that's good. That's good. I mean, I'm not. Yeah.
Well, that comes back to the type of people who are in that industry to begin with. So, ethically, no, we're not supposed to be doing that. So.
Yeah, interesting.
I think COVID is going to challenge that.
I
think some institutions are going to be in a situation where they perish if they don't. I haven't heard of anyone having to do that yet to survive. But if we come back and say that we're looking at 30% of museums possibly not surviving this, I think somebody's going to have to do it.
I don't want to keep you here all day, but I mean, you guys, you have more exciting things I even realized going on. I mean, so where do you think the entire industry goes from here? Like, do you think with the places that make it out post-COVID, like, not even like, where do you think? Like, what do you think needs to be done for everybody to survive and do well? Like, your personal opinion. I'm just curious. Like, because I remember working there, like, one of the most fascinating things was outside of the museum, getting to work with the tourism industry. And, you know, obviously, like, living in the city, you know, maybe not directly relying on tourism, but still, you know, it still impacts the image of our city, which does impact our business. I'm just curious, like, somebody who works directly into it or in it, like, if it were up to you, you know,
I think
what would you say?
What we're going to see as a change is that the industry is going to become a two-way street instead of a one-way street. And what I mean by that is, for the longest time, it was, come see us. Okay? Leave your home, come to us. Now it's going to be, we're going both ways. So we're going to come to your home, and we're going to do that virtually, but we're going to also make sure that your kids have resources that they can access our collection, whether it's the audio, video, pictures of stuff, information that they need for whatever they're working on in school. It's got to become two ways. I think some of the bigger institutions may not need to do that. And some of the smaller institutions that are volunteer-based are not going to have the resources to do that. But I think those of us in the middle are going to be the ones that kind of create that path. And those that don't are going to struggle to survive.
Gotcha.
And again, it comes back to innovation and who can think outside the box and how can I get you information? Because again, your son is doing a book report and he needs information, and you find out on our website that we have all these resources, and great, he's got those resources. Then maybe next time you're like, you know what? You haven't taken him to a ball game. It might inspire you to come back. That is how it becomes a two-way street. And so what we're trying to develop in those type of programs, we have this massive audio collection of interviews with athletes dating back 50, 60 years. It's all on cassette tape.
Right.
We have spent COVID digitizing that so that I want to be able to have a student, say Negro Leagues baseball for Black History Month, they're doing a story. I want to have primary source materials, newspaper articles, diary, journal entries, whatever that they can click on. I want to have audio clips where they can push a button and they can hear that person describe what their experiences were like. If we have video, let's put that in there and kind of give a student all of the resources that they need. Instead of just sitting on that stuff in the vault.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's find new ways to make it available.
Yeah.
So cool, yeah.
And that whole process costs money, and talking about it's all cyclical. Getting people in the doors pays for this future of digitizing all these important documents that nobody would ever see.
Well, and I think from also a fundraising standpoint, we've seen many on the corporate side become very focused in their giving. Okay, Care First is an example. Care First used to just kind of pass out money based on your presentation and whether it was a good enough. Now they've become very focused on what they fund and what they don't fund, and so we're seeing qualifications now. It's much more competitive. So Care First, the person told me and said, we're not supporting sports stuff right now. So when I talked to her about the science and math, and she's like, now you're in our area. Now you're now in our area of giving. So we've got to think about that kind of thing. Yeah. In terms of sponsorship. So can my school programs be paid for by another source that allows that, again, the radio and television model, that allows that programming to be free to the masses? So and that's how we are with Birthday Bash. And you remember this conversation. I argued that we should charge a ticket price. Right. Everybody else said you can't. Everybody's used to this stuff being free. So our Birthday Bash programming is free. Right. You can watch it for free. Now, you will have to buy a ticket if you want to actually ask the people questions. Sure. But the basic premise of it is free, paid for by about a dozen sponsors. And that's the way we're going to have to keep doing it. The challenge with that is that our corporate base has shrunk in Baltimore. So now we have to find new businesses like the Quincy Wilson Group, which is...
Not so gentle hint.
Well, he's a businessman.
But what I'm saying is that you're not Baltimore Gas and Electric.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So you're a smaller business that's going to have very focused giving. You're
Sure.
going to have personal reasons why you do or you do not support different things. And one, I got to find out what those are, but I have to reach those new businesses.
Right.
Okay. I have to find the new companies, the smaller companies, and now work to develop them into donors, supporters. So, a friend of mine, and sometimes it's just personal relationships.
Sure.
One of my neighbors has a mortgage refinance business. He's now sponsored our last 3 events.
That's awesome.
You know,
Right.
and he's building his business. He's getting his brand out, and he's being now recognized as a community supporting guy.
Right.
And I think people like to see that. They
Yeah.
like to see. Nobody wants to be title sponsor anymore. That's an interesting challenge.
Because of
Also,
the expense of it, you mean?
they don't want to be perceived as just throwing money around. So it's very interesting that we're finding that, you know, when you have the big sponsorship,
Right.
those are harder to secure. They'd much rather come in at a lower level.
Almost like
With a
nobody wants to
smaller-
be perceived to be doing too well.
That's right.
Interesting.
That's
That's
absolutely
interesting,
right.
yeah.
So, and you know, you and I have talked about
Right.
this. I mean, you're in an industry where the residential side is doing very well,
Right.
commercial side is not doing very well. You know, and you've said to me before, I said, "How are things going?" He's like, "I really don't want to." We're doing well on the
Right.
residential side,
Yeah.
and everybody knows that houses are in high demand. The market is really tight. You guys are looking for inventory all the
Right.
time, you know, and in the middle of a pandemic, so you don't, you know, we're all in this together,
Right,
but
yeah.
you know, some people
Right.
are facing it in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I see behind you a donate button on your website.
yes,
Is that the best way for individual people to donate to the museum, or is there another way they can reach
no,
out
that's the best way. That is handled by a third party. That is the safest way
Mm-hmm.
because it takes you to a link that is secure, and I never see your credit card information. Credit card information never leaves your control. If you mail it in with a credit card, people still do that. Drives me crazy. People write me a note and say, "Here's my credit card number," and put it in the mail. And I'm like, "What are you doing?"
to? Right. $25, please.
Right.
Right.
So, you know, don't do that. You can still do it. I'll take it. But the donate button is the quickest way because you also immediately get a receipt.
Nice.
And then text right off.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Great.
Nice.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You guys have any cool exhibits coming up? I know we talked a lot about virtual stuff, but
Our focus right now is all virtual.
which I can't disagree with you.
You know,
Right?
it's
Yeah.
all virtual. We
Yeah.
did an exhibit
Right.
featuring 100 years of our best items. That's on display right
Okay.
now. We wanted to give locals a reason to come down. You can find out more about that on our
Right.
website. But right now we are trying to build up the virtual things.
Mhm.
You can go to our YouTube channel and see some of those videos that we have created. As I said, we've hired a company called the Alisana Collective, local company, that's going to put a whole new level of polish.
Nice.
You know, quality microphones instead of somebody trying to record it off their iPhone,
Right.
which is how we started it.
Right.
Obviously, you know, we
Yeah.
were flying by the seat of our pants, but we wanted to do something. That's how
Better
we
than
started.
nothing.
You should see
And-
some of our first videos.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
You get to a point where you're like, do I want to leave that up anymore?
We go through this conversation weekly.
Yeah, and
we
we-
just had this conversation actually. Yeah.
We're talking about reshooting a couple of
Right.
them for that reason, but I also think that's fine. I think people's
Yeah.
expectations right now, you know, I want to see us have a little bit more polish,
Sure.
and we're going to get to that. But everything that we're focused on, I'm focused on
Right.
right now is virtual until I can find out that we've got fans in the stands.
Right. Are you so? That just led me into another question. Are you? You had said something before about the limit of people. Can people volunteer right now?
We have some people volunteering. So we have some people like the people who are digitizing.
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing is to listen. It's
Right.
one thing to get the interviews off the cassette tape. But if you don't know who the person is and what the
Right.
subject matter is, so we've had some people who are volunteering. They have to listen to all them,
Sure.
and they're not doing a full transcription, but they're kind of writing down what it is, so we know what's in there.
Right.
We have people doing those kinds of projects
Okay.
at the
I mean,
moment.
I'm just thinking if people are looking for something to do. You
Yeah.
know, the volunteer
give back.
opportunities might.
Yeah, and we're again we're trying to all think outside of the box in terms of giving people access at a level that they are most comfortable with.
Right.
So I'm not going to keep the museum open till 11 o'clock at night to accommodate somebody. But if
Right.
somebody says, you know what, I could get my family there Tuesday at 5. All right.
Right.
We're not open right now Tuesday at 5, but I can have somebody there. And we're all in this together.
Right. I love the direction you guys are going in so much because, and nothing against these two organizations, but I remember before what a challenge it truly was to always be tied to the Orioles season and the Ravens season, right? I mean, there were so many ebbs and flows with that, right? I mean, like, I remember those days and the conversations like, well, the Orioles just aren't doing well this year, and people aren't coming to see them. And, and the challenge of like, well, like, it was so frustrating to have more attendance when there was a Red Sox or a Yankees game versus, Seattle Mariners game. I don't know, maybe they're doing well, I have no idea. But like just those out of town fans.
Right.
So I love this direction of like more original content you guys are making to, again, nothing against those two organizations, but to not be so tied to their seasons,
Well, it comes back to sustainability,
right?
Number one, and we have to control our own destiny.
Right.
We are actually very proud of our relationships,
of course,
with both the Orioles and the Ravens. And listen, from their perspective, for all their employees, it's not fun when it's a losing season.
Right.
A winning season is a lot more fun for everybody. It's a lot more fun for the fans. It's a lot more fun for the players. It's a lot more fun for everybody. What we've tried to do is work with both of them, again, to see values. So what the Orioles have done for us now is they'll often send the visiting team media over to see us. Oh. And we get to do our thing and take them to the vault and show them stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that weekend I'll get an influx of Texas Ranger fans.
Right.
But the next time the Texas Rangers are in town, I might.
Right.
And so we're doing that kind of thing. And I think both clubs in particular have also really started to do more in the community. Right. There's been a change of philosophy that is, I think, exciting.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, we are responsible for our own destiny.
Right.
And whether or not they're winning or losing, it's our job to promote their history, celebrate their history, and make people feel good about,
and with
positives.
I know you don't just focus on Babe Ruth history.
Right.
The name and the old joke is, right, Fenway South or Yankee Stadium South, Camden Yards, it's cheaper for them to drive down here, buy a ticket, and eat dinner than it is to see a game at Yankee Stadium. But
it's also a better venue, by the way.
Well, I was going to get to that. It's always consistently voted one of the top ballparks in the country, right? So you do have people on a pilgrimage to see every ballpark in MLB.
Yep.
People who aren't even big baseball fans, they know about Camden Yards. I mean, the warehouse there, it's awesome. But when you hear about Red Sox fans and Yankee fans flooding into Baltimore for their away games, right? Those are two clubs that Babe Ruth played for. Mm-hmm. So you can't shut them out and say you have to sort of go after those fans also because they appreciate the history and they appreciate where he came from. And I don't think most people know that he was from here.
Right. That is, Babe Ruth has always been perceived as a New Yorker.
Yeah.
But not a Baltimorean. But we have that challenge with a lot of things in the city, and that being the birthplace of. I mean, I think if you talk to most Americans, they wouldn't tell you that, the Star Spangled Banner was written in Baltimore.
Right.
Fort McHenry. You ask somebody in Idaho, I'm sure they have no idea.
Right.
Probably in Philadelphia, right?
Right.
Right.
Not that I also know much about Idaho's history either. But we've got to take advantage of the assets that we have and put them together to makes it easy for people. We as people are bombarded every day now, and even worse than it was 10, 15 years ago, because our phones are dinging and we're in the habit of immediately checking things. We've got to make it as easy as possible for people to enjoy what's around them. Now, Yankee fans and Red Sox fans, they're in the same cycles that we're in. When the Red Sox aren't doing well, we do not see as many Red Sox fans. Sure. It's just the way it is. But all these things, are cyclical, and the Orioles are going to be a winning club again.
Yeah.
And they might surprise everybody this year. And I think that's good for everybody. I tell the Ravens every year, I said, the whole morale of the community going into the fall is based on their success. I said, when the Ravens are successful, we as a city is successful.
Sure.
You know, and that spills over to the restaurants and the hotels and everything.
I mean, that's true. Whether into sports or not, it is cool to drive in and see everything lit up in purple or even orange.
It's hard not to get caught up in it.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, and Quincy, you've heard me talk about this before. You know, sports is an important part of our culture.
100%. Yeah.
Because when you watch the news in the morning, okay, what is it? News, weather, and sports.
Yeah.
Okay. It's ingrained into who we are. And I think that so many people are missing it in this past year. And our stadiums and our ballparks and our arenas are one of the only places in the country that all walks of life can come together. Might be for 9 innings, 4 quarters, 3 periods, whatever. But we have a commonality, regardless of your economic background, cultural background, racial background, gender, whatever. For that brief moment in time, we have something together. And I think as a community, we're missing that desperately right now.
It's one of the only times you consistently hear, we are doing well. Well, you're not on the team. It's my team.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, I always find that funny. Like, how are the O's? Oh, we're doing well this year.
Yeah. I've never been to the Preakness, but I'm proud it's here.
Right.
I take some ownership of it. You know? So, yeah.
It's funny.
I think it's amazing. And a lot of these interviews that we've done, especially acquaintances and friends of yours who have come in, I don't have the background and the knowledge of your background and your expertise and stuff. And it's just really fascinating to hear, living here, that we have just so much cool stuff going on and so many really, really important things happening, and business owners who are working to better the future of this city. Perception, right? It all comes back to that.
Well, again, I think it is the glass half full or the glass half empty. We have some opportunities here. We had an uphill climb on tourism prior to COVID. Okay, inner harbor problems, safety issues, a whole bunch of stuff, investment. We've leveled the playing field a little bit. So we have an opportunity to fix some of that because now everybody's got similar problems. And how each community recovers is really going to depend on how willing people are to be part of the conversation, to think outside the box and try different things. The reason we're able to do new educational programs is because we didn't have any before. Okay, I'm not dragging along 30 years of educational programs that nobody wants to let go of. We can be innovative.
Right.
So we're leaner, we're meaner, we're more nimble. Some of the bigger institutions are going to have a harder time because they have established programs that have been very successful, but can they adapt them as quickly?
Yeah.
Right.
So we'll see.
Shawn, what is the biggest, or like, what is the most impactful thing people can do right now to help the Babe Ruth Foundation? Is it simply make a donation? Is it show up through the door? Is it to tune into your programming?
It's all of those things. Okay. I think all of us really need to say, what can we do to help the local economy within what I'm willing to do from a safety perspective. Right. And we're seeing that with restaurants. People are like, okay, I don't feel comfortable sitting down for dining, but I'll order takeout or curbside service. And the institutions that had figured that out have done much better than the ones who refuse to adapt.
Right.
Okay. I think for people locally, what is it that I haven't seen in a long time, or it's been on my list to do? So what I've tried to do is every month take in a museum I've not been to before. I'm a museum guy. I have not been to all museums in this area. So, but it's like, you know what? They need my help. So I'm giving them admission dollars. I'm throwing some money in the donation box. Everybody doing a little bit of that goes a long way.
Always forget how much fun it is to place tourists in your own city.
And you learn things all the time.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we're trying to figure out ways to partner. We're going to be doing some stuff with the Poe House.
Oh, really?
And you stop and think like the Star Spangled Banner Flag House and Babe Ruth and Poe. You've got 3 icons right there. So why wouldn't we try to figure out to do something together? And maybe that's enough for you to go, you know what? I should check that out. I wouldn't go to all 3 of them, that's hypothetical, but if you package it the right way, you might be like, you know what, that sounds pretty cool.
Right.
When I was director of the Hammond-Harwood Mansion in Annapolis a few years ago, They used to do a Edgar Allan Poe. They had an impersonator. Now, they didn't do crazy Poe, but he did a great Poe. He talked to people. We paired that with a port wine tasting down in their basement, candlelit port wine tasting with one of the local wineries. Sold out every time they did it because it was cool enough. And by the way, that was the younger audiences that showed up. So they were doing wine and Poe in a dark room with candlelight. They sold that out. They would have never considered doing that before, but somebody got creative.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many opportunities like that. We just haven't yet discovered.
Sure. I mean, I think now's the time. If you're going to try something, try it now, right?
And people are going to be way more forgiving. If it doesn't work out,
what's the harm, right? That's awesome.
I will tell you, last night, was the first night of programming of Birthday Bash. I sat there sweating. I'm at home. I'm not the producer. Katie Dick was doing all production, and I'm sitting there waiting and going, please work, please work, please work. Yeah. And then it comes up, and I'm like, okay, it's working. It's working.
Looks good. It sounds good.
Everything's
good. She knows what she's doing. Yeah.
And my phone starts dinging, and I'm starting to see emails from people going, "This is fantastic. This looks great." And I'm like, "It's working." Yeah. We'd never done it before. Yeah. And I've already had calls from other museums saying, "We understand you're taking Birthday Bash virtual. Can you tell me how you did that?" And I'm like, "Let's do it first, and then I'll tell you how we did it."
I'll tell you how it goes.
Right. But so. Is it crazy technology? No. But, did we try to take what we knew we could do and just try to do it a little bit better?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's probably a good spot to end. And we'll post all the social media links for you guys.
Very good.
We post this so people can get there. But thanks for coming in, man.
Yeah, thanks for taking so much time.
This was fun. As a museum guy and being closed so much, we don't get to talk to people. So it's all like built up.
A lot of people keep saying they're like, it's so nice to talk to somebody.
It's all built up. I'm just waiting for it to get out.
We're 6 feet, COVID safe.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much. Again, it's not having the knowledge of what you do. I don't think most people don't know that we have this stuff here. Well, so getting the word out is important.
By the way, thank you guys for what you're doing, because this is also important. This is one of the new methods of getting information out to folks, and being involved in the community. And I appreciate that you guys are trying to be innovative on this end. So let's figure out what's the next cool idea that we can do together.
I like anything with drinking. I liked his Poe and wine in the basement. We should do that.
Yeah. See, I've talked about,
can we get drunk in the vault?
We can get drunk right outside the vault.
Dude, he's so stingy with the exhibit stuff. He won't let us play with anything.
You played catch with Cal Ripken's glove.
No, it was Babe Ruth, and I didn't do it. I just wanted to make him angry because he was accosting me, and I didn't like him at the time.
Well, fortunately for him and for me, we don't have a Babe Ruth glove, so it was somebody else's glove.
Okay, so I'm not hearing a reason as to why we can't be in the vault.
Well, Babe.
We'll wear those white gloves, Shawn.
Babe, that's right. Well, that's what we do with the white gloves. It's taken a long time to get people to understand the white gloves, and once people do, I put white gloves on people. They're like, they don't want to touch anything now. It's contrary. It's hilarious for us, because then you're also when I hand you something, you're like, this is pretty special. This is pretty cool because I got to put gloves on to do it. But coming back, Babe Ruth was a rye drinker. And we'll do some.
We can organize a Babe Ruth and Bourbon festival.
Well, I was gonna say
that was the plan. That was actually the biggest thing I was working on was the Babe and Bourbon, or cigars. Sort of doing a thing.
So I have a friend who has a lot of experience in organizing these festivals, probably on a much larger scale that you were thinking. So if that's something you want to do, let me know. We will fly him up and get it done.
Yeah, it's absolutely something we want to do. And again, it's reaching a new market. So in Annapolis, they do bow ties and bourbon. Sure. And then they did blazers and bourbon. There was two rival ones. But it was it was the demographic. It was 20-year-old, 30-year-old, and 40-year-old men that we wouldn't have been able to attract otherwise. And for me, I get one of those. Hopefully I get more than that, but if I get one person who's like, I didn't know this place was here, I'm so into this, I want to get involved. And then we have done step one of building a relationship. So it's friend raising. And friend raising then leads to fundraising. If I can get someone to come in and they make a one-time donation, then I try to talk them into becoming a member. If I get them to become a member, then they become a regular donor.
Gotcha.
So that's the trick with every nonprofit, because once they get your name,
right?
So
it's also a lot simpler than it sounds, right? Or it's a lot harder than it sounds.
It's a lot harder than it sounds, but again, it's what people are passionate about.
That's true. That's
you know, and if you had a reason or an experience or something, and you know, we hear that all the time. From folks who came in, they either have a Babe Ruth story, or they have an Orioles story, or my grandfather was this, or my grandmother was one of the original cheerleaders, or part of the Colts corrals, and the stories begin. They were marching band, you know, the museum's history with the marching band. I have met so many people. The fire inspector came through the other day and told me he used to be one of the drummers in the Marching Ravens, and that went into a whole conversation. So, you know, if you can connect to people on that level, the work's half done.
That's true.
I have one stupid question.
Well,
surprisingly,
you know what I say?
Nope.
Okay.
You've seen the movie Sandlot, right?
I have not.
You have not.
Okay, you've never seen the movie The Sandlot?
I don't watch movies.
Ask me the question.
Do me a favor. When you get a chance.
I guess you get thrown out.
I don't watch movies, says Shawn.
The basic plot is kid hits an autographed baseball signed by Babe Ruth into his neighbor's yard. There's like a killer dog that they have to steal it from.
Oh, wait, I was thinking the Rookie of the Year. Sorry. I don't know what you're talking about.
I just want to know how accurate they were, if that looks like Babe Ruth's signature.
I don't know. I'm sure they did. Babe signed more baseballs. Babe would never turn anybody away who wanted an autograph. Even when he's dying, he's throwing signed baseballs out the window of his hospital room. So I'm sure
they had something to go off of.
Absolutely.
That's really cool.
I have a question.
Or they used a real Babe Ruth baseball too. They could have done that.
I have a question before we go, Shawn. Briefly, if possible, or not briefly, whatever you want. Give us the history of the called shot, because I know there's a lot of debate about that, right?
Oh, good question.
Sure.
Yeah.
So World Series, the Yankees are playing the Cubs in Chicago, and the question is, did he call his shot? And the story is that, you know, Babe Ruth comes up, and it's a tense exchange between Babe Ruth and the Cubs dugout, because Babe Ruth had called the Cubs a bunch of cheapskates, because players that had been traded over from the Yankees to the Cubs were not going to get a full World Series payout because they hadn't been with the club the whole year. So he called them cheapskate, and it became a whole thing. So they're razzing him. They're screaming at him. They're yelling profanities at him. This is not a, you know, nice kind of rivalry. This is really foul. And you know, Babe comes up, 2 pitches, both are called strikes. The dugout is now screaming. He allegedly then says, I'm going to hit the next ball right out of the ballpark, and then proceeds to do it. The question is, did he really do it? And we have the only known footage. And, you know, there's the movies, it's always portrayed he's standing straight up, back straight, and he's pointing. And the footage doesn't look anything like that. The footage looks like he's actually gesturing to the dugout and telling them what they could do with it. And the reason I suspect he didn't call his shot, because after he hits the home run and he's rounding the bases, he's still doing the same gesture at the dugout, telling them, you know, basically take that, you blah, blah, blahs. But George Will from the Washington Post once said, it's either true or it should be. And you know, the story is what it is.
It's like Santa Claus.
It becomes a legend.
Right, yeah.
You know?
That's
so perception of the Babe.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Thank you, Shawn. That was awesome.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to listen to the podcast.
To listen to fucking Mike Tyson.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to listen to the podcast.
Make sure you follow us on social media. Check us out on searchbemore.com and subscribe to the podcast. And all future content is available to you.
Yes.
If you subscribe.
Perfect.
Do it.
Thank you. Good job. Bye.